Hi, Vanessa. Okay, so our next talk is from Dr. Vanessa Merker. She is a researcher from MGH and does a lot of work in this area of patient engagement. And so I'm going to let her hand everything over to Vanessa and let her take it away and talk about her expertise. Thanks, Vanessa.
Hi, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here today. Actually, let me take off my mask just while I'm talking. And before I actually get started in my talk, I want to say I am someone who has worked with the NF registry data and helped put together a recent survey that went out about people, clinical care, access to clinics, and whether you're getting kind of care in line with what's recommended for NF patients. So I really want to thank everyone who participated in that. That's the kind of data that we are collecting to see if we are translating the best knowledge in NF and making sure it goes out to everyone, no matter where they live, where they get their care, and that's kind of what we've been using. So the NF registry to me has personally been such a good resource to try and make sure that happens, that everyone's getting the highest quality care. So thank you. Can you go back one slide? Okay, perfect. So today I wanted to talk to you about patient engagement in research. I'm a health services researcher at the Massachusetts General Hospital Neurofibromatosis Clinic. And a lot of my work focuses on how can we best leverage the experience of patients and family members to make our research better, because I truly believe, as CTF does, that you guys know what's going on, that we can make better use of that to more efficiently guide our research. And so one of the ways we do that is by engaging research patients and their family members, not just as subjects or participants in research, but as partners in actually planning. How are we going to design the study? How are we going to carry it out? How should we be sharing the findings? And that's what I want to highlight today. So when I say patient engagement in research, there's a lot of definitions out there. This is one that I like, which is that it's the active, meaningful, and collaborative interaction between patients, and I'll say family members as well, and researchers across all stages of the research process, where research decision-making is guided by patients' contributions as partners, recognizing their specific experiences, values, and expertise. So really recognizing what you guys bring to the table. You do not have to have a PhD to participate in research. We value the everyday experiences, what's happening on the ground, because that's what informs what we do. And this has been a growing imperative for health research internationally across many conditions. For many reasons. I think ethically there's an argument that people deserve to have the right to have an influence in research that's going to affect them. The content argument, which is it really does make our research better, knowing what outcomes matter to you and making sure we measure those outcomes, knowing what questions matter to you and directing our resources to those outcomes. And politically, to make sure that what we do has legitimacy and has chances to be implemented in the real world. When people see that patients and their family members help design this, I think it helps other people down the line have some trust in those findings. And hopefully it also is empowering to the patients and the researchers who get to develop these relationships. And I should say I borrowed this slide from a patient with rheumatological conditions who became a researcher. So this is someone who ended up getting a PhD in patient engagement, but it's not something that everyone has to do. But if along the way you discover a passion for research, we're here to support that as well. And this is something that really takes place across the research spectrum. So you can kind of think of research as a relay race, starting here at basic science. So discovering in the lab what proteins are affected, what signaling pathways, and then taking that and handing that baton to the more clinical insight, doing first in human study for the first time. Do we think in these tumor samples that it looks like this drug works, and then keep going forward to actually getting that into clinical trials, getting that into approved medications, making sure everyone has access to those medications, and ultimately to improve the whole health of the population. And patient engagement is something that can play a role in all of these stages. I think it seems most obvious near the end stages when we're talking about research that's involving people. Obviously, we need your input. But even in the earlier stages, there are oftentimes questions, especially now as we're innovating in gene therapy, we're starting to ask very early questions about who should be in the first gene therapy trials, what risks are acceptable to take, and that's happening now, even in the very early stages of research. I wanted to mention, this is also for Martin, there are kind of different roles people can take when they're engaging in research, kind of a ladder from kind of lower amounts of involvement or decision-making all the way up to being in control of the organization. Um, and this was, I don't know if it's maybe too fuzzy to read, but I'll say this was an article looking at just kind of examples of ways that we might do these 3 stages. So one was getting input from patients, and that's the traditional role usually of participating in a study. So I interview you, I give you a survey to fill out. Maybe we do with user experiencing testing. I have you use my website and see how you navigate it. But it's mostly that you're contributing data, which I'll then use to guide the research, but it's not as much of a two-way relationship. The things I'll focus on today are these next 2 stages of consultation and collaboration, which is really when patients have more of a decision-making role, when they're more involved, and when it's more of a bi-directional relationship. I'm sharing with you, you're sharing back, we're going back and forth. So that might be things like serving on an advisory panel or a working group, actually being on the research team. And I'll give some examples of how that is actually happening in the NF community. Another way to think, not just of being engaged in research at every stage, within any particular research study, this is kind of a diagram of how the life cycle of a research project starts. And I wanted to give some concrete examples of ways that patients and family members can be involved in each of these stages. So if we think about the first one here up the top, the identifying the research area, designing the study, we need to work with patients to identify research topics, make sure they're relevant to you, they're things that you care about, make sure our specific questions are addressing your priorities, and patients can even review research grants to help determine which of these is a priority and should get funding. And I know that, and I'll give an example for the Department of Defense NF program, patients are very actively involved and help determine which studies are going to get funding and move forward. For designing research, we can consult with patients on a variety of topics, but I think especially developing more effective recruitment strategies and attracting more diverse participants. I work, and I'll show you more slides about the REINS collaboration, which is an international NF group for improving clinical trials for NF, and we have a large cohort, 70 participants of patients and family members, and this is something they often help with, which is telling us how should we reach out to people, how can we make sure that this is getting in front of the people we want. And I've gotten great ideas in my own studies. I'll say Rene Moss, I don't know if she's here. Rene, I was just talking about a study that I was submitting, and it was Rene who suggested using Google Ads that would be geofenced to a certain location so that we could find people who searched for, say, neurofibromatosis care. And I'd never heard of that before. It is now in our grant and proposal, and it is directly due to working with a patient and who can bring not only your lived experience with an F, but any professional experience you have from your work doing things like advertising and marketing and all these other fields that really benefit the NF research, and we really appreciate. We also try to, get input on what our procedures are to minimize burden on participants. This is also something that happens a lot in REINS, where people bring trials and, we might point out to them, and we being the patients and the family members, do you really need us to come in 4 times for an MRI? That's going to be a lot. Can we actually do it? Could you get that goal done in 2 or 3 MRIs? Because then we'd be a lot more likely to sign up. And balancing that scientific rigor with things that are actually going to be doable and have people sign up for. We've also had patients review consent forms or recruitment materials or surveys to make sure, is this understandable? Does this proactively address the concerns that people might have? Make sure that those read well. And of course, selecting outcomes that measure what matters. So maybe we're studying pain and we have a trial that says when we've already selected probably a few measures, but then you say, you know what, the pain really affects my sleep too. I think that that would be really important to also add to your measures, because if you can improve the pain, you might improve sleep. And if you can demonstrate both of those, then maybe the drug will be more likely to be approved, or we can see that effect. So being able to get the full spectrum of what matters and making sure we're getting that is very important. And then moving kind of now to the next stages of conducting and analyzing research there, the purple and blue phases. I would say maybe this is the least developed, but definitely a new area for NF research and something we're excited about, where there are examples of studies where patients actually end up helping out with directly helping recruit patients and even conducting some of the research. In work that I did with some of our REINS members, actually, they, from the beginning to end, helped me do this project. They wrote the survey questions, we distributed it, and one of my patient partners, Andres Lessing, actually helped me with the analysis. It was open-ended survey questions, so we asked people in REINS about why they had joined and what they were doing with research, and we had to assign labels, to kind of code, well, what was this person saying, so we could group them together and kind of come to patterns that represented kind of the findings. And it was great being able to work with him, because he would see nuances that I didn't see. Because he was a patient, because he was a person living with NF, I thought, oh, the way this person wrote the sentence, they're probably talking about this. And he'd say, actually, I think they're talking about, it's a little bit different. And so having those nuances was great. It is a big time commitment. And I'll say, you don't have to be, if you're interested in engaging in research, you don't have to do every single one of these tasks. We realize you're not a full-time researcher doing this 24/7, but when people are interested in doing that, it really has a lot of benefit. And another example I had in here is participating in Delphi panels, which are these kind of consensus groups to come to decisions, where you have a lot of experts come together to vote. And that's something we've also done in REINS, where a mix of clinicians, researchers, patients, parents all came together, or have been coming together for the past months, to vote on what the most important outcomes related to cutaneous neurofibromas are. So should trials measure the size? Should they measure stigma related to it? Should they measure social functioning? What are the outcomes that we should be telling people to measure? And it's patients and parents who are participating in that, as well as equal co-voters alongside all of the medical professionals. And then the last thing I wanted to mention too is disseminating research findings. So having patients and family members help us share this back with participants. I think that is something that's growing and becoming, I think, clear that it's so important. If you participate in a study, you should know what the results of that study were, getting that information back to you personally about what happened in the trial and, what did we find, but also getting it back to the community as a whole in webinars and infographics, whatever the best route for that is, developing those materials and sharing them, and in sharing with scientific audiences and policymakers. In REINS, we've had patients as speakers at the conference sharing some of our survey findings. And I think they can have a really great role in advocacy and kind of sharing back that need to pharmaceutical companies, to policymakers. I know the NF community does a wonderful job advocating for research funding, and then we just got another, I think, $25 million for the DoD. So, having patients that can actually speak about the research and that impact and get money from legislators is so powerful. And so I actually wanted to talk about that. Speaking of government funding, this is something that is at the highest levels of, government bodies and agencies that are embracing this, and specifically for NF. I know that a lot of people actually haven't heard of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is a very large funding body, kind of similar to the National Institutes of Health. although it's technically a private nonprofit organization, it was created by the Affordable Care Act, and it's actually funded through general taxes, through the general treasury, and actually a tax on health insurance plans as part of the Obamacare. But their entire mission is focused on this patient and stakeholder-led approach, which they have really innovated in terms of having patients really lead at all stages. What are the questions? What are we going to fund? Reviewing proposals. And it's basically required that if you are going to get funding, and this is an agency that has billions over since its history, has devoted more than $1 billion to research, you have patients and family members on your team. And one of the ways that this has benefited our community actually is I know CTF was an awardee of a PCORI grant for our conference. If you were with us a few years ago in Atlanta, that was partially funded by PCORI, which has an interest in kind of educating and training folks in how to participate in research and what patient-centered outcomes research is. If you're interested, this is not NF specific, but if you aren't interested in getting involved with PCORI, they're very dedicated to patient engagement. You can become an ambassador, serve on an advisory panel. There's a rare disease advisory panel. Do reviewing, so reviewing of the grant applications or also the final publication. So when the research is done and they're going to write up their findings, patients review that also before it's released. And you can even just suggest a patient-centered research question. This is like one of their sample questions, but if you say this is an interesting question that you should consider funding, you can submit it on their website as well, which I think is great that they really engage. Another group that is committed to patient engagement and has really done, I think, a remarkable job of elevating this over the past few years is the United States Food and Drug Administration. And so I know this is a tiny table, you don't actually have to read it, but I just wanted to say that ever since, I think it was the 21st Century Cures Act, in response to that, now every single drug that gets submitted for approval to the FDA has this table, and it's the patient experience data table. And you write off, how did you involve patients when you were developing this drug? And some of these are more traditional kind of patients as participants. So things like patient-reported outcome measures. You know, did you fill out maybe a questionnaire about your pain levels or your fatigue, you know, your symptoms? That might be one way. Some of them are newer ways of talking to patients. So doing qualitative interviews or focus groups, which is something that I have been doing actually with funding from the Children's Tumor Foundation. We have started doing this in the Intuit NF2 trial, which is a platform trial for NF2 patients who have progressive tumors. And I actually interview them after they've been on treatment to ask kind of how have their symptoms changed, how has the drug been affecting them, how do the side effects kind of weigh with the benefits and risks of treatments, to really have that chance for, you know, for an hour and a half to really dig deep and, you know, how is this affecting your life in a way that maybe is a little bit more in depth than what you could fill out, you know, in a quick survey. So that's been really great and illuminating, and we're looking forward to sharing that. One of the ones I wanted to highlight that's more on the engagement side is this meetings with patient stakeholders. And that's something that I know CTF has also been a part of. And so for those of you who didn't know, there was actually AZTF and the National Organization of Rare Diseases facilitated this meeting where people, patients with NF, directly met with the FDA in what's called the Voice of the Patient meetings to share directly with these people at the FDA who help make the decisions about what drugs are going to get approved for use, about what living with NF is like, what the current treatment landscape, you know, what are the gaps that are missing and what we really need in new treatments. And I think that's really great that they were willing to, you know, hear directly from people who were affected. And then I actually alluded to this as well. The Department of Defense, for those of you who don't know already, has actually dedicated funding for neurofibromatosis, the Neurofibromatosis Research Program. And when you submit for funding to this agency, there's 2 levels of review, both of which involve patients and patient advocates. So in the first level of review, there's 2 scientists and 1 patient who review every single grant and help score it. And then at the higher level, there's what's called the integration panel that helps say, okay, now after each of these grants, let's balance kind of where do we want to put our money towards, what looks the most exciting, making sure we hit all of our priorities, and setting these research priorities every year. And that group has a number of people from the NF community on the board. So here's a list of the research priorities for this most recent year. And this can change based on the input of these folks. So really, I think it's done a marvelous job, the different agencies in kind of embracing this in the US. And this is a friend who I work with a lot, Greg Erickson, who is a parent of a child with NF1. And I just took this quote, which he had provided in their booklet, to say kind of how in his, it was a little nerve-wracking at first as someone who's not a scientist to review grants, but that, a multiple of the people who have served have said, it's clear that my opinion matters, and that there are things that have changed, decisions that have changed because of what we've had to say. And so I think I'm very grateful to everyone who served on that panel. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight is a group that I am deeply involved with, and we'll talk a little bit more about too on Friday at the Lunch and Learn, is the REINS collaboration. REINS stands for Response Evaluation in Neurofibromatosis and Schwannomatosis. And response evaluation or response criteria are essentially, how do we know that a drug is working? What is the outcome we should use? What's the threshold we should use? So is 20% shrinkage good enough, or should it be 50%, or does your tumor have to go away for us completely for us to say this drug was a success? We also do things like outcomes. We know pain is an issue, but what's the best way to measure pain? What questionnaire should we ask people? Those are the kinds of questions we tackle in REINS, really with the goal of making clinical trials more efficient and effective, and having consensus throughout the international community where we all agree this is what we're all going to use. So if you run one trial in California and I run one in Massachusetts and someone else runs one in Australia, we can compare the results because we're collecting similar data, and we can directly say, oh, this drug actually looks a little better than that one in the other trial, and really maximize, with having a rare disease, maximize our resources, and all kind of in the service of trying to really facilitate approval of new medications and getting more treatment options out there. Right now we have, I think that's 8 or 9 working groups that meet for different topics. So some of them are specific to specific manifestations, like there's a specific cutaneous neurofibroma group, but other things are more about the method. So patient-reported outcomes are like the questionnaires you would fill out. Functional outcomes are things about how your body functions, like hearing and walking and things like that. We have our brand new group on gene therapy, which was just launched a few months ago. For people who are interested in gene therapy, this is something that we're very actively interested in. And the biggest thing is we have our patient representative group. So REINS actually was started by my mentor, Scott Plotkin at MGH back in 2011, but it became clear to us after a couple of years of working on this how much we needed patients involved. And it was in 2017, maybe, that we officially launched our first cohort of patient representatives, and it's grown since then. I should say it's called patient representatives, but we do include family members as well. So anyone who has a loved one with NF, any type of NF, can serve on this committee. And just a tiny bit of background about sort of, what does REINS actually do? We meet monthly, each working group, to make progress on, their specific research projects. And then as a whole collaboration, we come together twice a year. We used to be exclusively in person, and now with COVID, we moved to do hybrid meetings that are part virtual, part in person, so that everyone can kind of review the recommendations we're making, and then we can disseminate them to the community. CTF has been a huge partner in that. One of our annual meetings is always at the same time as the NF conference, and they have helped funded and disseminating these things. But we also work closely with the government, specifically the NIH and the Food and Drug Administration, to make sure we're incorporating their input into, what data do they need to see to get a drug approved, and vice versa. They help listen to us, as we put forward our recommendations. And we've incorporated patient engagement in REINS at 3 levels. So I mentioned we have a dedicated working group for patient representatives that all patient representatives can come to and family members. And this is really so that we can get a big, diverse group who can give kind of targeted ad hoc feedback on proposals. So it's something that we've started in the past year or two. Any researcher in the NF community, whether they're a part of REINS or not, can come to our group and present an idea and get feedback from our group of representatives about their study. Whatever questions they have, how can I recruit? What outcomes should I measure? We'll give them that feedback. We also have patients who work in every one of the other working groups. So if you're interested in gene therapy, you can go attend those meetings. If you're really interested in cutaneous neurofibromas, you can join those meetings. And that gives the opportunity for patients to have that more involved feedback, that kind of involvement over time that's really focused on a specific topic. And then we also have 3 patients and parents who sit on the leadership council, which is kind of like our board, our oversight board that helps plan kind of really high level goals of what the policies of REINS are and where we're going to have our priorities. So it's something that's really suffused through the organization. We currently have 70 participants and we are taking more. So if you are interested in potentially joining, or even if you're not, you're still welcome to come Friday, but please do come Friday if you would be interested. We always take new members. So right now we have about half and half people who have NF themselves or our family member caregiver. We have people with NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis. We have currently a little bit extra females than males, but we try to have welcome people no matter what their education, race, ethnicity is. As I mentioned, you don't have to have a PhD, you don't have to have a college degree. We try to keep everything accessible and really value your input. And so this is actually a word cloud we did, and there's a poll in the Whova app, I think, right now, that's also a word cloud about what values you think we should prioritize in running programs to work with patients. This word cloud was a little different, but just why did people want to sign up for REINS? And I thought I liked this word cloud because it highlights a lot of the things we try to do, which is not contributing to research being the biggest, but collaborating, learning, education, making a difference in research. And the way that we try to do that is, this is just a schematic. I'm the chair of the group and I have 2 patient representative co-chairs. And we have a number of kind of different projects we work on. So people who work on the REINS working groups on those topics, who give input at our monthly meeting through the clinical trials, and also work on trying to better disseminate research back to the community. And a lovely parent of a person with NF, Miranda McManus, heads that group. And she's really leading the charge on trying to make research more accessible by writing lay abstracts, or what's called public summaries of our scientific papers, so that you could actually read them and understand, and people can quickly look through and see what the recommendations are. Andres leads our recruitment arm, so these are planning of how are we going to attract more people, and we're always looking to make that larger and more diverse and more representative of the NF community. Formerly Tracy and Rose here at CTF had led our education arm, so we know people might need some background materials about how clinical trials are run, or even what NF types there are, since you might be very familiar with your own type of NF, but maybe haven't heard as much about the other types. So we have educational materials. And then the last is our evaluation group. We're always trying to make this work better. So just to give you an example of kind of what are the trials that people, or studies that people in the NF community are bringing to us for feedback, they're generally in 3 groups. Sometimes I put them under outcome studies, but oftentimes people have, say, a survey that they say, we're thinking about at launching the survey, can you review it and tell us if it makes sense or how we might word things? And that's been on things like appearance, so disfigurement related to tumors, sleep concerns, communication concerns. And I presented the trial I just mentioned about adding qualitative interviews and got feedback. One of the biggest things we do is clinical trials. So an actual planned clinical trial that someone is submitting for funding, or that has recently received funding but hasn't started. And we've given input on a wide range of these trials, For NF1, we've done a plexiform neurofibroma trial that was going to do a new treatment, or actually was it selumetinib plus a new treatment to see if that might be more effective. Drug treatments for MPNST, which is malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, that cancer that plexiform neurofibromas can turn into, and atypical neurofibromas, which is that in-between stage between the plexiform neurofibroma that's totally benign and a malignant tumor. How can we stop those in their tracks with something called high-frequency ultrasound, which was very cool. Bone issues, so looking at the effect of MEK inhibitors like selumetinib on bone, is there any benefit there? As well as NF2 and schwannomatosis related trials. So our very most recent presentation was from Dr. Plotkin on a new trial that is hopefully for a drug that might prevent people from losing their hearing, or at least delay the time to losing hearing. And one on schwannomatosis pain, so a new pain therapy. And people will come to us to share these trials. So one, I think, benefit of this is you get to hear about new trials before they've even started. These are not things that are running yet, and you get to give input about how should we recruit and what should we measure, and is this even worth doing? That was a big question with the NF2 hearing loss in terms of a proposed design that would randomize people to either receive drug or a placebo, and talking about the ethics of that and would people want to sign up. And that is a topic we will plumb further at tomorrow's Lunch and Learn. So if you're interested in that, please do come by and we can talk about that more in depth. And then the last big topic I had was like very early planning. So talking about things that are maybe not going to come to clinic or come to trial for a couple of years, but researchers now kind of realizing the earlier we ask you about your input, the more effective it's going to be. And we've had 2 talks like that. We actually had a whole meeting on gene therapy, a whole day-long meeting to help plan that, a lot around the risks of gene therapy, how to communicate those risks, and who should we start as we kind of cautiously enter the waters of gene therapy. And then also a project on vision preservation and restoration therapies. So envisioning this future where maybe we can actually reverse vision loss from optic pathway gliomas. This is just a sample, and I would say most of these projects were from different investigators at different institutions. It's also open to anyone who is or is not involved in REINS, and open to pharmaceutical companies as well who want to get feedback from our group. So I think I'm really proud of how this has grown, and how we always hear back from researchers how valuable it was for them to present. And so that engagement, I think, is really great. And this is a figure actually from a paper we did, the paper evaluating the REINS program, sort of how is it that we help people? What is the effect that we're having? And I have here at the top that really patients, we found, have a unique perspective, which is, I think, probably obvious to you guys. You have unique things to contribute that clinicians don't know about, or researchers. So when you can share both your personal experience and what you know about others in the community, it really can inform how we do our research, both directly in that the patient representatives help us determine our research focus, review the outcome measures, give input on study design, and help us, actually do the research. But in indirect ways as well, we found by having patients in the research team making these decisions regularly, it also helps clinicians and researchers get a better understanding of patient concerns, see the bigger picture. I think this was one of the findings. A lot of us in research hyper specialize, or clinicians hyper specialize in one aspect of NF and become experts, which is great. But then sometimes you can lose the bigger picture of how it relates in a person's life who has many different kinds of issues going on. And so by having patients that kind of help us broaden our perspective outside of our niche and work together, I think, more efficiently, and work across disciplines. So bringing together people of different specialties, different backgrounds, and to really help us communicate more clearly. I think people think, oh, well, if you're going to talk to patients about the research, and you're going to take out the jargon, is it just for the patients that you're doing that to make it simple? And actually, it's for everyone, because NF is such a multidisciplinary field. A lot of us don't understand the jargon of the other people. I will say, when I have my colleagues who are doing research in mice and flies, that is not my area at all. It's hard for me to understand. And so actually it's been a good boon that by focusing on this inclusive atmosphere, it benefits everybody, and it really leads to what we think has been improvements in the clinical trial outcome measures that we're using, making them more relevant to patients' concerns, more feasible to actually do, and hopefully less burdensome on patients to complete. And hopefully this will make clinical trials for NF better. So with that, I'll end here. I'm happy to take any questions. If you have any questions after this as well, or are interested in joining REINS, please feel free to email me, and we'll be happy to onboard you. And we'll do a little bit more work on actually talking about a specific clinical trial and getting your feedback on that trial at the Lunch and Learn tomorrow if you're interested. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. There is one in the chat, so I'm just going to give that to you. There was a question about what you mentioned, high-frequency ultrasound,
Oh,
and there was just a question about what that is.
yes, okay. That's why I didn't put all the details in there. I'll say I'm not the person who presented that trial, so I'm not super familiar, and I
Yeah.
don't want to like say something that's totally clinically accurate, but the
That's okay.
idea being that you can use MRI to guide ultrasound waves to actually target a tumor and maybe destroy it or incapacitate it in some way. So ultrasound is like sonic waves, and if you can, focus them on a target, perhaps you can use it to destroy a tumor. I think they actually use it for kidney stones. It's a way to break up kidney stones. So that is, I think, early stage. I'm not recommending people go do that, but that's exactly what I think this group highlights, is you get to learn about cool new technologies. I had never heard about that, and kind of get to learn about them early on, and how are people thinking about using them and trying to apply them and see if they work enough.
Yeah, thank you.
So first of all, fascinating talk, Vanessa, very good. So the high frequency ultrasound you can use for multiple things. You can either use it to burn the tumor, which is exactly what Vanessa was talking about, but we're also funding a study for the moment where, in fact, this high frequency ultrasound is used to deliver drugs, to kind of package a drug, and then only break up the little package with the drug inside at the place where it needs to be active. And that is, in fact, very, very valuable for patients with NF, because the drugs that we have available for the patients are still often oncology drugs. So this new technology is developed in Texas, and we're just looking forward that this may work and may be a new way of delivering drugs to the tumors.
We probably have time for maybe one more question if anybody wants to ask something. Yes, great. I'll bring you the microphone.
I'm just curious if the program is international, or is it currently US focused?
Yes, it is international. We have people from, I think, over 10 countries right now. I will say it's predominantly the US. In order to kind of facilitate having people across many time zones, because we have people from Australia to Europe, which means there's no one time that everyone is usually awake. We do alternate our meeting times. So we alternate between, at the current moment, a Wednesday evening and a Saturday afternoon, so 1 month on each. And we record all of our meetings to post to our private YouTube, so that if you can't make it, you can always watch it and send your comments afterwards, as a way to try to facilitate participation. The meetings are in English, so that would be one limitation for that participation, although all of our meetings are captioned, and same as here, to help facilitate participation for people with NF2. And I also realized I should give a shout out. There is multiple REINS patient representatives in the audience if they want to raise their hand and say hi. Come on, I see you. So if you have any questions about what it's like, there are many people here who I'm sure can also speak about the experience.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Good. All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa. We really appreciate that. All right. Nope, sorry. I'm going to do a little dance.